Selena, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You have a very powerful story. You lost your son 6 months ago to fentanyl.
Yes.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Let's go back to, when your son was born and just early childhood.
Yeah. Early childhood. Stephen was my firstborn. His dad and I, his dad was active duty Marines, and we did a little traveling in the beginning. We were not married for very long. Stephen, I think, was 4 when I divorced and returned back to Missouri and moved back in with my mother. I was pretty young. I was 19 when I had Stephen. So my mother and I basically co-parented and stayed in her home for a year or two after I came back. I had been living in North Carolina with his dad and then came back. Ornery little boy, very smart, very intelligent. We all joked that he was going to be an engineer, loved to tear things apart just to see how it works. High achiever. In school, he was class clown, ornery, always finding trouble and mischief trouble, nothing, crazy, but he was an active little boy. And I did not realize how over the top active he was until, my friends were like, man, that kid's a lot. I was like, what do you mean he's a lot? I wouldn't know anything different, But yeah, he was average, ordinary childhood growing up, visited his dad as often as I think they could with his military career.
This show is sponsored by Open Recovery Addiction Help. Whether you're newly sober, in long-term sobriety, or even maybe looking to make a change in your life, Open Recovery offers 24/7 support right from your phone. It's anonymous and packed with tools to help you stay connected, stay accountable, and build the life you deserve. Download the Open Recovery Addiction Help app today and take the next step in your recovery journey.
And I often get asked what was his trauma, what was his childhood trauma, because most people who have issues that it kind of comes back to a point of trauma. Mm-hmm. Only thing I can figure out what might have been a point of trauma is he had a very strained relationship with his dad. And at 12, let me take that back. At age 11, I had my second child. And at 12, Stephen was really acting out. And I needed some help. And I had asked his dad, could you take him for a school year? Can you help me out here? And that intention of taking him back for a school year, we'd all sat down, agreed upon it, and made the decision that this was going to be a opportunity for him and his dad to connect and rebond. And his dad was remarried, and he had a young daughter. And it wasn't but about maybe 2 months. And he called me and he says, I'm sending him back home. We can't do this. And I think that really traumatized Stephen, that he was abandoned again. Because when he came back he was living in New York. And when he came back, he was a different child. He was very much sneaking out at night, stealing bicycles. He'd been brought home because with the police because he had started a dumpster fire. Just ornery nuisance boy nonsense that we kept thinking, get him in football, get him in this activity, create an avenue for this energy. And it didn't matter what we put in front of him. He just really was rebellious. And he entered into the Department of Juvenile system. And at one point being, I think some of it had to do with my inexperience with being in any kind of trouble. I'd never been to the jail. I'd never been in any kind of trouble. I didn't realize what that was. If I allowed the juvenile system to take over and send him to a boys' home, I, in my mind, thought, well, I'd rather teach him a lesson now than wait until he's an adult and he ends up in jail. Mm. And my thought was send him there, teach him a lesson, bring him back home, and we'll regroup, start on a new page. Well, all I did was pipeline him to prison, and I did not realize it at the time. He went into these boys' facilities, and when he didn't learn, he was learning there. And when he came out, he was already acting out and finding the trouble that he was, taught about in these juvenile facilities. I think he went to 3 juvenile facilities between the ages of 14 and 17. And when he would each time he would come home, he would try, but he would revert back into that behavior. And at that time, I'm pretty sure, I knew he was smoking marijuana, but I think at that point he had tried meth. So somewhere around the age of 14, 15, he had tried meth and had been probably using meth a whole lot more than I even realized. At 17, I told him he had gotten his GED through the Department of Children's, I don't know what it was called, through the Department of...
In the juvenile facility, he got his GED.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't even remember what it was called. He got his GED through that program. And at 17, I told him, you have to look at some college, or you have to look at military, or you have to look at trade school. But you can't just do what you're doing. You're not going anywhere. He joined the Army, and we were very proud of him. When he graduated basic training, my whole family, we all loaded up and went down to Oklahoma and, celebrated that huge accomplishment. And he was very proud of himself. And we had seen the turning of that corner. And we were just like, he just needed structure. Who all, and this was during a Desert Storm period of time. And he ended up in...
Was this Desert Storm, or was this... Desert Storm was in the early 90s.
Yeah, so it would have been at the tail end.
Shock and awe, maybe?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
So when we went to Iraq the second time.
Yes, we went, yeah.
Got it. So early 2000s, roughly.
Early 2000s,
Got it.
yeah. His unit was actually over there, so he just basically showed up, and they didn't have anything for him to do, which is a horrible thing to do with somebody who has issues of needing structure. Mm-hmm. And so he landed in Tacoma, Washington at the military base, Army base there, and quickly discovered, I have a $10,000 sign-on bonus and nothing to do, which was a horrible situation, and especially in that part of the country where they've decriminalized drug use out there, and it's a mess out there. And he relapsed very early on in his military career. He relapsed and very quickly was in trouble with the military. Due to the fact that his unit was not there, he actually was processed out of the military and did not have a complete file. So for years, when he literally left without a complete file, which put us in a position of, we didn't contact the military because they could have easily chosen to go a different route with him. So Stephen technically left the military without a discharge. And through all those years of being in and out of prison, because later on he went to prison, through all those years of going in and out of prison, we were surprised that the military never came looking for him. It was a very gray area. And we still to this day weren't able to connect and get in, utilize any of those benefits as a vet, because he technically wasn't. Yeah. He'd been in the military for a year, but because they never processed him, his unit wasn't there to process him. It was an incomplete file. Very odd situation for us to be in for him.
So he leaves the military.
Mm-hmm.
He comes back to Missouri?
No. So embarrassed and ashamed that he got in horrible trouble out there, he just drifted into the community. He became homeless. And he spent probably 6 to 8 months. Nobody knew where he was at, did not contact us. And we were scared to death, didn't know where to even start looking for him. He finally resurfaced and contacted a family member to come get him. My aunt and uncle lived in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he asked them, would you come get me because I'm in a mess out here? That they were not prepared for him. They were Good people, educated, never seen what, and we honestly back then we were unprepared for any of it too. We didn't know what we were dealing with. And he went and lived with them for a short period of time. And during that time that he was with them, he had an accident, a car accident, and had a traumatic brain injury. Broke the cochlear in his ear. So he was deaf in one ear, had a traumatic brain injury, and spent probably 5 or 6 months in rehabilitation for that injury. And I did go out there. I did, as soon as we found out that he was injured, I was there. And at that point, we said, you need to come home. You need more support around you. We did not know that he had been out on a long drug binge back then and fell asleep, fell out behind the wheel, and wrecked a vehicle. We did not, still at that point, had any idea the level of addiction we were dealing with. So when I brought him back to Missouri, tried to set him back up, here you go. We're going to try and start this over again. And he was off to the races. And it was, in our family, we call it pillaging. He would be basically just out running amok. He would steal cars, break into homes, and it was just a process of addiction. The fuel that feeds the addiction is all criminal behavior, all criminal activity, whatever it takes to get the money, to get the drugs. And he just basically rotated in and out of prison with this mentality for about 13 years as an adult. So he entered the prison system probably he had the brain injury at age 19, and then he probably entered the prison system at age 20. So never any follow-up care from that traumatic brain injury, straight into prison.
So he went to prison. What was the first thing that he did to get into prison?
I'm pretty sure it was a tampering with a vehicle, which is stealing a car.
Oh, okay. And that was the car he nodded out in?
No, it was not.
Okay. That was a separate.
That was actually
accident.
A friend's vehicle.
Got it. Okay.
So that was in Utah. Mm-hmm. When he came back to Missouri, he didn't have anything. So he gravitated back to the Kansas City area and quickly made connections with people he had known prior. And he was off to the races. And it was, he was most known for stealing cars. Mm. That was his thing.
So for 13 years, he was in and out of the prison system. Can you talk about what that does to a mom, what it does to a family, and just kind of the in and out that he had over 13 years?
Yeah, we'd have to have a whole other podcast to dig deep into that because I had to learn the prison system.
Yeah.
But yes, I can remember walking into prison the first time to visit him. And it was very traumatizing for a mom. You're looking at this very controlled environment, and you're treated almost like you're a criminal as well as the loved one coming in. You're being, sit over there, take your shoes off and walk through this. And I don't know how many times I was turned away because my clothing wasn't appropriate. And I'm like, what do you mean it's not appropriate? I mean, it was just, if I had a hole in my pants, if it was frayed, just very strict environment. And I'm a pretty conservative mom. So I was like, well, what do you mean my clothes, turned me away, and I would have to go run to Walmart and change clothes and come back. Walking into prison was a harsh reality that most mothers are not prepared for. At least I wasn't. We were some family that had generational addiction. This was my first experience to the Department of Corrections and what that meant to our family. I never took my youngest son. I did not want him to see that. That was hard for me every time I went in. You would walk in and you were seated at almost like a kid-sized table, and you had to face one direction. The inmate had to face it the other direction. We could have a moment of a hug, but nothing more. And then we could sit across the table from each other. There were vending machines. You could get snacks for your loved one, and you could have snacks. And it was usually a 4-hour visit. And it was the only time that I could sit across from him and really look at him and talk to him. And, it was hard because you were either talking about, I wish you were home so you could see this, or your brother's doing this. And that would make him feel bad because he was missing out on it. Or we would have moments of just this awkward silence because I didn't know what to say to him. Mm. And there were, do you understand what you have to do to change to come home? So there was never everyday life conversations in those visits. I had more in-depth, good conversations with him on the telephone where we just had a daily conversation, or every 2 or 3 days we'd have a conversation. Mm. Those were more realistic. But walking into prison with, the prison guards, you're walking in and you're seeing them with the guns. And when you walk inside and you have the COs standing around you, it's an intimidating environment. So having a meaningful conversation was very difficult to have in that environment. I had more meaningful conversations with him over the phone where nobody was standing there watching us.
Yeah. When he was in and out of prison for 13 years, were there any stints of sobriety during that period?
I know that there were sobriety happening, but there was also drugs happening in prison, for sure. Mm. And I could tell when the request for more money was coming. In most states, prisons are set up as they are a for-profit system. So people don't realize, if you've not been around it, you're paying for toilet paper. You're paying for toothbrush and toothpaste. You're paying for your hygiene, your essentials. Prison does not offer that. So if your family members are not supporting you, and what I mean by supporting you is I sent him, I think, $85 a month. And that would just barely. And I was smart. I was finding out the cost of that stuff so that I wasn't giving him any more than what he absolutely needed.
Smart.
So when he would start making excuses or start saying somebody stole stuff from him so he needed more, or, hey, Mom, there's an art program in here, but I need this money to be able to purchase these things. Sure, he manipulated me the first 2 or 3 times going around with that nonsense. Then I finally, wait a minute. You're in an art program. Why are you needing this for the, once you finally start realizing I'm being hustled by my own kid, then you get a little more, and I called him out on it. I wasn't nice about it. There was a lot of times I would say, provide me some information about it. Who do I need to call up there to verify? And then, the story went out the door.
I'm laughing because I actually used to do shit like that as an addict. I used to
you're
manipulate
hustling the people that care about you.
I can relate to your son.
Yeah. He did that a lot. He pulled one over on me. So in prison, there's always communicating with women on the outside. That is a hustle in prison, as old as prison is around. And supposedly there was this girl that was good for him and he really liked her. And, Mom, I need you to, send me some money so I can I can have flowers sent to her. I mean, he had to work this whole system out because he knew I was pretty smart. You're not sending somebody flowers to the outside. What the hell are you talking about? Well, no, Mom, but if you send this guy some money, he'll go do it for me. The first time he pulled it off. The second time I'm like, wait a minute, no. So I mean, there was hustle that he even had on me and I called him out. And he had enough respect for me that if I called him out on it, he would go, okay, yeah, all right, Mom, you got me.
Yeah.
And then we wouldn't talk for 2 or 3 days because I'd be mad at him because you played me,
I'm hearing you said it the first time with the flowers, and like you cared and loved your son so much that, this quote unquote girl on the outside was making him happy and you wanted to help out there. And you gave this guy money supposedly to get flowers based off of what he was telling you. And it just shows like your love for just trying to help him. And he obviously wasn't willing to accept the help at that time.
No.
So what year did he get out of prison?
got out of prison during COVID, right before COVID really hit and shut down the prison system. Okay. We were anxious to get him out of there because we knew that, there were some delays in letting people out of prison because of COVID. So he came home in 2019 and the spring of 2019. And very much, he had spent the last 6 months in prison in the hole. And he tells the story, or he told me that he purposely went to the hole so he could get himself cleaned up, so he can come home sober, clean. Mm-hmm. I knew that he used methamphetamine before he went to prison, during the time he was in prison, but I had no idea. When he came home, he was an addict, a heroin addict. Had no idea. Okay. Heroin was introduced in the prison system to him.
Okay, so when he gets home, was he in fact in the hole for 6 months, and was he really trying to get himself clean?
I don't know. I think he was in the hole probably for at least a month, probably 30 days. He came out of prison from the hole, which is a horrible thing for someone to have to do.
Yeah.
And then once he came home, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was different. Now, granted, anybody coming home from prison for the first time, or any time they come home from prison, there is a shell shock that you come to the outside, and you have just going to a restaurant, just going to McDonald's, and you have options in front of you is overwhelming, because in prison, it's so regimented, it's so controlled, you are institutionalized, and it's a routine. Boom, boom, boom. Lunchtime, dinner, breakfast, it's on time, it's all done. You don't get choices. This is what you have. But when you come home from prison, the whole world is open to you, and it's overwhelming. And he really did not thrive in that environment. He would be overstimulated in the very beginning. And he came home, and we live on a farm, and he was like, I need to hide out on the farm for a while, Mom. I cannot leave the farm for a little while. I am too overstimulated by everything. That lasted about 2 weeks. And then he was off to the races.
How did you know he was off to the races? Did he come home high one night?
No, I could tell he was starting to get, we called it kind of an itchy behavior. He started, I need to go hang out with some friends. I've got some friends that I've contacted and reached out to me, and I need to go hang out with them for a while. I got so-and-so coming to pick me up. And I was very protective of our home. I'm like, yeah, no, I'll take you into town. You're not bringing him out to the farm. I'll drive you in town. Because I knew he was going to leave regardless, but I didn't want somebody coming to our home. And I knew the first time I took him to go meet somebody, and I just said, when you're ready to come home, let me know. I'll come meet you, or I'll come pick you up. Because again, I want to protect my home. But I knew. I drove away from that day going, well, that's the end of that. We had 2 weeks with him. And I was right.
What was the first major incident since him coming home from his drug use?
So Stephen was like peeling an onion. He would have so many things happening that you would just barely get through one before you'd find out there was another one. Stephen would immediately start with, I need some money, Mom. How am I supposed to live out here without money? You're going to put me in a situation where I'm going to be hustling for money, Mom. So send me, help me out with some money. I did not give him money like that. I would tell him, then I guess you're going to have to hustle, because I know what the money goes for. And so Stephen would more than likely connect back up with some of his friends from the city. And it was car stealing, without a doubt. A lot of that stuff I didn't know about. He didn't necessarily tell me about it until a charge was picked up. And he did. He had charges for tampering, multiple charges for tampering. And it would literally be, he had court dates lined up left and right that we were trying to navigate through. He would basically be out on the streets for months at a time. And then he would call me, Mom, I need to come home. I need to get clean. I need to get sober. I didn't always bring him home. Sometimes I would take him and we would spend 2 or 3 days in a hotel. And I would try to be working with him to try to get him into detox and working with different recovery programs, trying to find a bed for him, trying to navigate that process. He would go for 2 or 3 days and then he would leave him. He rarely would stay in a program. I think he did finally finish a 30-day program. And as soon as they placed him into a sober living house, I think he started a job 2 or 3 days, 4 days into that job. He got fired for showing up at the job high and then kicked out of that house. And then lose a cell phone, couldn't find a cell phone. He would be lost again. 3 or 4 weeks later, he would call me, Mom, I need a cell phone. I was notorious for getting him a cell phone, but for my own selfish purposes, because I would tell him, I'll bring you a phone, because I was always making the phone where I could track him, because I have no problem bringing you a phone, because I would go in there and set it up where I could track him.
Yeah.
Because I, as the mother, was scared to death at where was he going to end up at, and how were we going to find him? So I had no problem putting a tracker on the phone so that I could make sure, if something happened to him, we would know where to start.
Were you still with, you had a second child.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still with him?
I never married my second son's father.
Okay.
Yeah, we were never a couple.
Okay.
I raised both my boys pretty much on my own.
Okay.
However, I did marry my husband now 4 months before Stephen's injury, 4 months before he was paralyzed. So you talk about a rock that has held our family down. That's my husband. He didn't ask for any of this.
Yeah.
So my son came home from prison. When he came home to our house.
Yep.
And this was my husband's first introduction to my oldest son.
Yeah.
I prepared him the best I could, but I said, I cannot prepare you enough for this ride I'm getting ready to go.
Wow.
And I would tell him, I'm going to need you to be my rock, because I can go too far down that rabbit hole. And I'm going to have to be able to rely on you to tell me when I've gone too far.
Yeah. Can you walk us through the day of the accident? What happened?
Yeah. So Stephen was, because he had spent some time in the Tacoma, Washington area, he had been extradited back out there because he had been in trouble on a probation. He was on probation and he left the area. That was 15 plus years ago. And he'd been in and out of jail, in and out of prison, and they never extradited him. But for some strange reason, the laws had changed and they extradited him back to Seattle or Tacoma, Washington. I had made arrangements for a sober living house for him to stay in. He needed 92 days in Tacoma, Washington to finish out that probation.
When was this, by the way?
This would have been in October of 21.
Okay.
So in October of 21, he had been extradited back to Washington. I had located a sober living house for him to stay at. Like, listen, you got 91 days. That's all you got to do out there. Just stay at the sober living house. They assured me, if you pay the $1,800 for him to come stay at our house, we'll then get him on Apple Care, which is the state Medicaid program. They pay for the rest of your son's stay. So I had him arranged. They went and picked him up. They brought him back to their house, or one of their houses. And we quickly realized that Stephen was not in a legitimate sober living house. This was it was a scam. And Stephen quickly said, I have no problem staying here, Mom. These guys are not clean.
Yeah.
This guy here that runs this place, they're all hustling on the side to help him find building materials for the next house that they're remodeling. And I was very angry that I had handed over $1,800 thinking that this guy was legit. He was salt of the earth. He was helping these people. Stephen began hustling for this guy, and Stephen was shot at some point doing some illegal behavior for this guy. I'm not quite sure, never quite got the story. He had an altercation. I'm not sure if he got caught stealing or what the scenario was, but Stephen was shot. And I wasn't even notified. Actually, the cell phone that I gave Stephen, I woke up the next morning and pulled it up on the computer, and it was at a jail. It was pinging at a jail in Tacoma, Washington. And I sighed. Oh, great. And I actually said, well, at least he's okay. All right. Well, now we can ride the 91 days sitting in jail. All right. I actually was working from home, and I went to work. I logged in on my computer and went to work. And about noon, I realized I hadn't heard from him. And I was like, well, that's not normal. Usually he'll wake up the next morning in jail, call me, and that whole process, all right, well, you're sitting in jail until you. So at noon, I called this jail and said, hey, my son's in jail. I need to find out what he's in jail for. And the lady says, well, we don't house anybody here. This isn't a jail for housing inmates or people who are in jail. And she says, I don't know why you would think he's here. I said, well, because his phone is pinging there. And she puts me on hold. And then that scenario of, oh my gosh, he's in trouble. And I probably just identified him. It's probably his phone is sitting there because it's probably evidence, and I just identified him. So I'm sitting here going, I can't believe I've just jammed my own kid up. And a detective got on the phone, and I was pretty defensive. He says, well, I need to know who this phone belongs to. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to give you any more information. I said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called. And he says, no, ma'am. He goes, no. You need to understand. I need to identify the person that had this phone because he's currently listed as a John Doe. That hit me. I said, what do you mean? And he says, I don't know who owns this phone, and I legally cannot tell you anything more until I know who he is. I said, is my son alive? And he says, the gentleman that has this phone, I cannot tell you anymore until you tell me who he is. And I said, we're stuck in this battle of if I give you this information, you're going to charge him for a crime, but yet I don't know if he's alive. I finally just said, the person that had this phone, did he have a tattoo on his head of the word grandma? He says, yes, ma'am. And I said, is he alive? And he says, the person who has the tattoo on his head is alive, but is not good. And I said, okay, I can tell you who it is. My son is Stephen Keener. And he's like, okay, ma'am, I have to call back over to the hospital and get them to release that information so he no longer is a John Doe. And he says, can you send me a picture of his ID so we can prove it? Yes, I have a picture of his ID. So we went through that scenario of realizing my son is alive, but just barely. And he couldn't tell me anything. So I spent about, I spent about 2 hours waiting on the phone call from the police to call me back, or the medical team to call me back. And then that phone call is the phone call no mother's prepared for. And that medical team telling me that my son was permanently paralyzed from a gunshot wound, and that he was paralyzed from the chest down. And there was a lot of medical terminology thrown at me that I had no idea what they were saying to me. I'm trying to write it down as they're saying it to me. And I'm like, okay, I can be on an airplane this afternoon and I will be there just as quick as I can get my bags packed. And they're telling me, ma'am, you can't come. We're in COVID. You can't even come to the hospital. And I said, the hell I can't. You figure out how I'm getting in there. I said, if I have to go apply to wash dishes in the cafeteria, I will be there. You don't understand. I am coming. You prepare a doctor to look me in the eye to tell me I cannot put my hands on my child. I'm coming. And I did. And I was probably one of the first people they let into the hospital because I wasn't going to take no for an answer. And that was pretty, walking into his hospital room for the first time. They were trying to prepare me in the hallway. And I'm like, I don't care. Get out of my way. I don't want to hear all of the medical garbage. I need to put my hands on my son. And I actually video footage. I actually carried my video camera in and videoed that. I don't know why I did, but I just felt like at some point we needed to look back at that. And that was pretty traumatic for me to see the level of injury. And he couldn't put his arms around me. The nurses helped him put his arms around me. And I remember telling me, it's okay. It's going to be okay because I'm here. I'm the mountain mover. I've always been the mountain mover. We're going to get you better and we're going to get you home. And that's what I did for 6 months, is sit beside him in that hospital, encouraged him every step of the way of his therapy journey of trying to put his life back together and trying to learn how to live a life as a quadriplegic, because he was no longer the thug in the streets. And he said to me, I can remember him saying to me, Mom, this will be easier now because I can't get myself high. And I said, no, but now you are going to go tell your story because your story is going to change lives.
He was shot one time.
One time through the neck.
And it hit his spine through.
And it severed his spinal cord. He was a complete C5, C6, between the 5 and 6. It was a complete spinal cord injury. So nothing below the paralyzed line, which was mid-chest, nothing below that had any movement or feeling. Now, he could raise his arms. He could raise his elbows. He had some, which I can't remember which hand. I think the right hand had some upward movement, but once he got here, he couldn't go any further. So a lot of video you see of a wrist that flops, that's his left wrist. He had no fingers, no dexterity in his fingers. He had a little bit of thumb movement, but not enough to hold anything. So he couldn't, without an adaptive, he couldn't feed himself. He couldn't grip. He couldn't pull. He had no hand movement, basically. And he was a tattoo artist that he had learned the trade in prison. So it was literally taking away the one thing that brought him joy in this world was tattooing.
So he was in the hospital for 6 months. Mm-hmm. You were right there by his side.
Advocating every step of the way, because the medical system, if you don't have somebody there keeping an eye on, everything from his meals would be brought in and they would drop him off and nobody would be there to feed him. And I would have to get onto the medical staff. How do you expect somebody to eat if they can't lift a fork? Well, his PT people, I said, I don't care, quit pointing fingers. Get somebody in here to feed him, even if he should be able to. He cannot miss a meal. The nutrition alone is what's going to help him through this process. So I advocated in every step of the way. He had a stage 4 bed wound that had to be managed. And they were a little bit afraid of me because I had enough of a safety background that I was calling them out on how in the world does he get a stage 4 bed wound? He's quadriplegic. That is your staff and your problem. Now it's your fix. So I advocated every step of the medical way. And again, I was the mountain mover. I was always that mountain mover in our family. And my son knew that. And during that 6 months, he was extremely grateful to have me there. I know he was, because he said it to me often. I'd be dead if you weren't here with me. And he knew that it was a toll on our family for me to be there for 6 months. I left home. I was newly married. We'd been married 4 months, and I left to come be with him. And there was a couple incidences that was very touch and go. He circled the drain a couple of times on us. He got pneumonia. And it's a very, very busy hospital, and the staff was stretched very thin. At the end of COVID, they were exhausted in the medical field. They had no family members coming in to help like they had been having before. Not that every patient has family, but that family component to the recovery process is very essential for recovery to be successful. And so, yes, we did very much navigate that recovery process. And then it came time that they were talking about, where do we discharge him? What's the care plan going forward? Well, it's the state of Washington. They aren't required to work with us in Missouri to get him moved to Missouri. They were pretty much advocating for him to go to a nursing home in Washington. I'm like, we're not residents of Washington. He's not staying here. I don't want him in a nursing home because we've just seen what we did with nursing homes during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way I'm putting him in a nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally realized, I'm going to have to extract this asshole out of this hospital. I'm literally going to have to make a care plan, and they are not going to help me with this. They are going to hinder us with it, because their easiest answer is to transport him over to a nursing home. Now he's out of their hospital. Now he's has a social worker in a nursing home that becomes the problem, or he becomes their problem. And I was like, that doesn't fix our scenario here. Mm-hmm. He is not a resident. And the funny thing was, not funny, but the whole time he was in Washington, the whole point of him being in Washington was the requirement for parole or probation in Washington. And I called the probation officer a couple of weeks after he was in the hospital and said, he hasn't been in to check in with you because he's in the hospital. And I had said to them in the very beginning, you can't put my son on the streets out here. He'll never make it home. And the lady was like, that he's not anybody special to us. He's going to follow our protocol. Okay, great. So when I called her and told her he's in the hospital, he's not going to be leaving the hospital anytime soon, she says, well, then we'll just go ahead and call time good. I said, oh, no, you will not. Oh, no, ma'am, you will not. You will come see him. You will count every day of what he owes you, because he's sitting in this hospital because of your requirement. If he was never required to have, if you can write it off now, you could have wrote it off then. I go, you will not write it off. You will count every single one of those days. And I want you to come visit him. I want you to do your PO check-in with him, because I think it's important that you see what the product of this environment created. So he finished his probation requirement laying in the hospital as a, in my opinion, as a victim of the system that forced him to be there. So when we came close to the end of that 6 months, my husband and I were like, how do we get him home? I can't put him, I don't know how we're even going to get him on an airplane. I don't even know how we get him. They won't even release him unless we have a safe discharge plan. Luckily, I had some great friends in the nursing field, and I had some amazing nurses that were there that were traveling nurses. So they didn't have any political affiliation with the hospital that we were in. And they communicated with me. Okay, she goes, ethically, I cannot go through and maybe explain to you how that's done, but I can tell you what needs to be done. So I literally sat down with some nurses and some friends and we designed our own safe discharge plan. And I actually hired a medical escort company that traveled with us, and we put him on first time I've ever flown first class is for medical reasons, we flew first class because we had more room and we could, sit together and help him if he had any issues. But we literally put him on first class. We flew with him with a medical escort nurse and transported him home on our own. I had to arrange for hospital bed and hospital equipment and everything to be set up at the house and documented that it was done because they weren't going to let him leave without that care plan documented. So you just flip out a Visa credit card and you say, put it on the card, put it on the card, put it on. Yeah. And that's how I got him home is we basically bankrolled him being discharged and brought him home to our home and to our house. And that was an eye-opener to what the rest of our life was going to be looking like, is that we had my son living in a wheelchair, moving out to our home on the farm. And that was some really tough days for him to return back home and realize that the rest of his life was never going to be the same.
Now, when he gets back, so he isn't using in the hospital. He gets back. So this is like the longest time
Yes.
that he has had clarity and sobriety. And when he got back, was he like going to meetings? Was he doing, I know what he could do was limited.
Yeah.
But what was that like when he returned home? And obviously it's a change of life for you guys, for the family.
Mm-hmm.
How was that navigated?
So there were a lot of people in that process of bringing him home. Stephen had a longtime girlfriend that when he was out on the streets, they were together. And it was one of the only people that I allowed to come to my house because she had long stints of sobriety and she was always constantly trying to pull him back into the sobriety. They would relapse together. She would try to go back to sobriety. During the time he was in Seattle, Tacoma, Washington area, she had been in jail. That was her very first time ever in prison. I think she had like a 9-month stretch that she had to go do. In fact, I had to inform her when she called me from prison that he had been shot. So that was tough to tell her that and know that she was going to really spiral and not be where she could go be with him. She had gotten out of prison, I think a week before Stephen came home from the hospital. And so when we came home, she was there. She came to be with us. I let her come move in with us. She had the longest time she had sobriety under her belt. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to all do this. This is our home. This is the home of sobriety. You're going to work a program. You're going to work a program, and we're going to do this. And so we had local community mental health that was coming to the house weekly for both of them. They had separate counselors. They had separate caretakers. Caseworkers. Yep. They had their team coming in, meeting them on the same day sometimes, different days sometimes. But we had a rotating door of help coming in.
That's amazing.
I had advocated and navigated the Medicaid system through Missouri and had probably one of the largest care plans in Missouri's history. I had 70 hours a week of paid caretaking for Stephen. So we had caretakers coming in 8 to 10 hours, 12 hours a day, depending on the day and the needs. And those caretakers were paid through the state. And the Medicaid system doesn't pay people what they need to, so they weren't highly paid individuals. And so we had a fine-tuned machine happening. He had therapy every single day. Nina was out there with him, working out on his therapy. He was getting out of the house and going and doing things. I had purchased a handicap or a wheelchair van, and we were doing outings. I took him swimming. We would go to the grocery store. We would go to doctor's appointments. We navigated that like rock stars. I mean, we had it down to a calendar that hung in the front living room. It was a massive calendar that we had every appointment listed. That's my wheelhouse. I'm extremely structured and organized. And it took that. And Nina thrived in that environment. And what was really amazing.
Nina was the girlfriend.
Nina was the girlfriend.
Yep.
What was really amazing is watching the two of them navigate sobriety and their relationship together. To see a relationship happening in sobriety. They had to learn each other all over again. And I don't give her enough credit. That girl had worked in a nursing home. She had more knowledge and skill and talent that she didn't even realize, because she pushed him and she kept on him and she encouraged him every step of the way. To watch her already have that knowledge of how to lift him, how to move him, but she reached him in a way none of us could ever reach him. She would aggravating to motivating some days. And they would squabble and fight. And I would ask her, I said, why are you guys fighting? She goes, because it pisses him off and he'll go outside. And I wanted him to go outside. I couldn't get him to go out on his own, but I'm going to make him mad and he's going to go outside. And you were wicked smart. And she would laugh it off because it was never a fight for her. It was a fight for him.
Yeah.
And she, we had rough days. I don't want to get you wrong, play this out wrong. She was a recovering addict too, with horrible bad habits and behaviors that drove us crazy and nonsense that she played and he played. But we worked through that knowing that what other option did we have as a family? We needed her help, but he needed her help more than we needed her help. So we tolerated a lot of things. Nina is still in my life to this day. My son once jokingly said when he brought her home to me, "Mama, I brought you home a gift. Her name's Nina." Now she tells everybody, I am Stephen's gift to his mom. And she has been, because she has maintained her sobriety.
How long is she sober today? Multiple years.
Yeah, I mean, she relapsed because she didn't stay with Stephen.
Yeah.
There was a gap in some time. So
Yeah.
She and Stephen stayed at our house, and we're pretty sure Stephen relapsed right before he moved out of our home. We had a big changeover in caretakers, and we had a caretaker come into the house, and Stephen and this caretaker, I was trying to back Nina off some of the caretaking before it would destroy her, just wear her out. I encouraged her to go get a job, out of the house, go do something besides take care of Stephen. You will burn yourself out. We had a caretaker come in who Stephen, I'm sure, manipulated her, but nevertheless, she brought in some opiates. And we didn't know about it at the time. I can say this now, but at the time, we couldn't figure out why the change in his behavior, why all of a sudden he was saying him and Nina needed to move out. They need to have their own place. They need to do their own thing. They can't be under our roof the rest of their life, and pushed and pushed and pushed to move out. And so I fought hard against that because I knew that that was too much pressure on Nina and he was going to fail. And didn't matter how hard I fought, it was going to happen. So at that point, I realized, okay, I just need to be a part of this and make it work. I need to help navigate this because I'm not going to be able to stop it. So I need to be a part of the help to make sure it goes well. So they moved out. The same caretaker continued to work for them. And Stephen quickly was back in it. The caretaker was bringing the drugs to him.
So he moved into your house after the hospital, let's call it early 2022. How long was he in your house until he moved out?
A year and 2 or 3 months.
Okay, so now we're in 2023, call it mid 2023-ish. He moves into this place with Nina, and he's now being taken care of by this new caretaker who was bringing him opiates.
In drugs, yeah. And Nina contacted me pretty quickly and said, it's a mess over here. I don't know how much longer I can do this.
She was still sober?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She was like, I can't do this. I cannot go down this road with him. And so I started getting back involved, trying to figure out what was going on, who was bringing in the drugs. And Nina finally figured out it was the caretaker bringing in the drugs. And it was a caretaker that was bringing in the drugs, but then Stephen was getting out and around. We moved him into town. And so in that community, he was getting out and around in town. And it was almost like he was, if anybody was in active drug use, it was like he was a magnet for them. And it was almost like he was a rock star. It was the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen. If somebody was using, they were coming to hang out and talk to Stephen. And before long, Stephen's house became the drug house. It became the house that everybody came over to. And Nina was like, I'm out. I cannot do this. And she moved. She left. And the caretaking fell back on a lot of me. I had to hire another caretaker to come in. And by that time, he had made contacts in town enough that it didn't require a caretaker to bring it in to him. He was getting it from anybody who would bring it to him. And Stephen had then become very vulnerable to that element, even though he thought he was in control of the situation. He had people that were coming in and using his house as a shower, his food. And then the caretaker that had come in that was clean and was doing a good job as a caretaker, she was having to run these people off, and she was wore out from it. And she stuck it out for about a year and finally said, I can't do this. This is insane. And she resigned. And at that point, Stephen had no caretakers. He had nothing but drug addicts taking care of him that were, in my opinion, parasites. And he had to navigate getting up, getting food, getting all of his needs met. And it was all done through who was going to come get high with him and who would come help him. And most of the times, oh yeah, we'll come over and get you up and get you around, but you got to get us high. So his money that was meant to take care of him was now the drug money that everybody was coming over to use as drugs or to bring him drugs. Or, the whole scenario was a very sick and twisted relationship between users and what they would do for him. It was very sick. And I was horribly, my anxiety was through the roof because I was the crazy mom at that point. I would come over with my cell phone running, my camera on my cell phone, my video going, and I would tell them, all right, you guys clear out. You guys get out of here. And they would, well, we're invited guests. I go, well, when you kill him, I've got the license plate number off of your vehicle. I just need to know what your name is because I'm coming after you. And I was the crazy mom that would clear the room out. And then as soon as I would leave, they'd all come back. It was this game of telling these people, you understand you're killing my son. You understand every time you administer to him, that's a crime. And I'm going to prove it. Because if you kill him, I'm coming after you with everything I got.
So, can you walk us through the tragedy that happened in October of 2024?
So Nina is not in the picture other than she calls and talks to him every day. and she always had him on FaceTime. Nina was really good about calling me and telling me what was going on. Nina would play that game with him so he would talk to her. He never realized that she was feeding me back information. She was scared that he was going to be killed by one of these people. So she maintained a relationship with him just so she could somebody had to keep their foot in the door. Mm-hmm. And there was another woman that was in and out of his house a lot that claimed to be in a relationship with him. She was an alcoholic and an opiate user. And Stephen would tell Nina more of the truth than he would tell anybody. And Nina would filter what she would tell me. And she kept saying this girl was going to probably kill him, that her use and his use was dangerous. And I knew that this woman was very dangerous. She was claiming to be a caregiver, but really she was in a relationship with him that was a very sick and twisted relationship. And then while she was there, she was taking care of him. They had multiple fights that particular week. She was out of the picture. She was not there. But yet the neighbors would tell me, well, her car's coming back and forth. She's in and out of that house. There was a couple other neighbors that lived around there that were drug addicts that were coming in and out of the house regularly. I was driving by all the time. Mm-hmm. Neighbors were communicating with me to tell me what was going on. So I had a pretty good idea of who the players were. Stephen had multiple, probably drug parties at the house, people hanging out, lots of people at the house. And it was in October, it had been a rainy week. And at some point, everybody leaves. And my guess was the drugs were gone, because nobody was at the house. And Stephen was in and out of his house a lot that day, that couple of days leading up to his death, or leading up to when he went to the hospital. And I could tell he wasn't getting to bed. He wasn't sleeping, because his coming and going was all hours of the day and night. And I was trying to get in, trying to talk to him, trying to stop by. I became the nuisance mom that just wouldn't stop. Didn't matter if he was mad at me, I still came over. And the day that started this, he'd been in complete psychosis for probably the last 2 months, 3 months. And he utilized those people that were using drugs as his gatekeepers. Like, he would tell them crazy stories that weren't true about me to try to convince them to protect him from me, because he wanted to continue to use. And he knew I was the person going to stop all that. So they all lied to me. They all protected him in some way as the gatekeepers. That particular day, he called me and said, I don't have anybody to help get me cleaned up. And I said, I can come in. I'll come get you cleaned up. He's like, I don't want you over here. I don't want you to see the house. I don't want you to see how bad it is. I knew he was still in psychosis, but he was still somewhat making rational conversations with me. And then he called me. He said, no, don't come over. I got somebody over here. I got somebody helping me clean the house up. I'm good. I don't need you here. I still came into town. I still sat outside of his apartment watching to see who this person was. I was like, okay. I sat back. He said he had his day. His day was going to be, it was pouring down rain. And I thought, they need to put him in bed, not getting cleaned up. Why are they getting him cleaned up? He needs to go to bed. And I went ahead and went into the house, and I had said, Stephen, you need to go to bed and not be out in this rain. Don't be running around town in this rain. He's like, I knew he was probably meeting somebody for drugs, because he was hell-bent on getting cleaned up and getting himself out. He was not going to go to bed. He didn't tell me why, but I knew it was for drugs. This person that was over there was a male, and he was telling me, you need to go home, Mom. Just leave him alone. Let him live his life. Why are you up in the middle of his business? This person was just really aggressive with me. And I left. I said, okay. I left. And the next couple of days, I was hearing from everybody in town, do you realize Stephen's out in this pouring rain? he is driving his wheelchair all over town in this pouring rain. He's sitting outside. He was outside all evening at somebody else's house. He's, just really bizarre behavior for him. I kept trying to get a hold of him, and he would not take my call, refused to take my call. Then finally, I can't even remember what day of the week it was. It was a work day. It was during the week. The hospital called me and said that he'd been brought into the hospital middle of the night, unresponsive. And I said, is he responsive now? Is he okay? They didn't want to give me any information. They were like, we just need to know, are you his next of kin? Are you his mother? This information is in his records. We need to know. So yeah, I'm his mother. What's going on? And they wouldn't really give me any information. And so I just went to the hospital. Like, what? I need to know what's going on. Well, when I got to the hospital, they asked me if I was, at some point during some of this, I had been his legal guardian. And they asked me, are you still his legal guardian? And I said, it doesn't matter if I'm his legal guardian, I'm his mother and I'm his next of kin. So I need to know how bad of a situation are we looking at? And they said, well, he's intubated. And I went, what? I go, he has a DNR on file for one, but what's happened to him? Why is he intubated? Well, if you're not his guardian, we can't give you that information. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. No. That's not true. That is not true. I am his legal next of kin, and he's now intubated, which means if he doesn't want me here, he can't tell you that. Or if he does want me here, he can't tell you that. So you cannot keep family from him once he's in the state of not being able to make that decision on his own. And they stood their ground. They weren't going to let me get in there and see him. And I'll be honest with you, I lost my shit right there in the emergency room. Mm-hmm. Had to have security remove me because they were stopping me from seeing my son to see what we were dealing with. And I warned them, get him out of this hospital. It's a small community hospital. I said, get him out of this hospital. You cannot take the care of him at the level of what he needs. You better get him out of this hospital because I'm coming back within a guardianship. I'll be back. I had enough knowledge to know that in the state that he was in being incapacitated, I had every legal right to go get guardianship at that point. And I did. I got it within probably about 2 hours and came back and they already had him transferred. Yeah. So I had to hunt him down through which they wouldn't tell me what hospital they transferred him to. So it took me about an hour to locate him. And I walked straight into that hospital, Truman Medical Center. Never once made me show guardianship. I was his mother, and they had him intubated, and they said, we want you here. And even if he doesn't want you here, we want you here. And which was never the case, because even though he was intubated, he had there was probably about 8 hours that he was coherent enough that he knew I was there. He knew I was in the room. He was intubated, but he was communicating. It's hard to explain how. I mean, he communicated with shaking his head, yes and no. Mm-hmm. They, asked him, Stephen, do you want me here? Yes. He, at one point, improved enough that they brought him off the intubator, and he was on a high pressure, like a forced air PAP. He still couldn't come off of it, but he still really couldn't communicate. But he was able to mouth words at that point because the intubator was out of his mouth, or the cannula that goes down was out of his mouth.
So really quick, just for the viewers, he had overdosed.
Yeah. At that point, I still didn't know what got him.
Know.
At that point, I still didn't know that what got him in there.
Yeah.
Because he had an infection. It was when I finally got to Truman Medical Center that they said that the amount of drug cocktail in his system was probably what induced him being unresponsive. That Narcan had not been used on him. And that once they got him in their care, once he was transferred from the first hospital to this hospital, that they went ahead and reversed those effects realized once they got a toxicology, they started reversing the effect of the opiate, and he still didn't come out of it. So they said that the overdose definitely made him unresponsive. I still don't know what the first hospital did. I don't know. Maybe they did Narcan and it just wasn't written in the file. I don't know. But the length of time that he went without oxygen created the downward spiral. That the opiate, had it not been intervened on, probably would have cost him his life. But being intervened, he still went for a long period of time without oxygen. So he was never quite right. He didn't make good sense. He knew who was around him for that short window of time. He did want me there. He did say, he did, shake his head to multiple people that, your mother's here. Is that good? Do you want her here? Yes. At one point, he was awake with his eyes. And even though he couldn't grab my hand, he laid his arm over my hand, like I had my hand laying up on his body. And he moved his hand over to my hand and he looked me. He turned his head and looked me in the eyes. And I think I'd been standing there talking to the doctor. And so when he made that contact with me, I moved into his face and I told him, I said, "You're okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And he had a moment of closing his eyes and opened his eyes back up. And I said, I don't know medically where we're at with you, but I'm not leaving you. And he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. And that was the last that I had any communication with him because he declined. And Nina was there. I had gotten Nina to the hospital. Nina was with me when that happened. And he flatlined with us in that room. And medical got us out of there. And when they came and got us, they reintubated him. They put him back on. And he was, they said that he had so much mucus in his lungs that they needed to do a procedure to clean his lungs out. And I said, okay, so we intubated him for this procedure to clean his lungs out. And they said, yes. I said, so you're going to come, is he going to come back off being vented? And they were like, that's the goal, is that we can get him back off of it. And I said, because he doesn't want to be on a ventilator. I said, I'm not wanting to say this is the end for us, but I don't want to put us in a situation where he's having to live on a ventilator. And they said, let's give it a couple of days and see what happens. I said, okay, give them a couple of days to see if they can do the miracle and get him back. We'd seen this happen before. And it was 2 days of going in and watching him slowly decline. And on that third day, I called his little brother. I said, get on the first plane home. He's like, I'm just leaving work. I said, turn around, go to the airport. I have a plane waiting on you. I bought him a plane ticket and he got on the first plane home. Nina was there. I got his dad was living in Arkansas and he came. And my husband was there and a close family friend was there. And I gathered them all and I said, we need to make some decisions. I can't do it by myself. I cannot make that decision by myself. There is a DNR on record. I can't find it at the moment. I don't need a DNR to make this decision. I know what his desires were when it came to this. And I said, I can't make this decision. I need you all to sit here with me, sit here with him, make sure that we're making the right decision. I don't want to make a decision too quickly or let it drag on. And after Logan, my youngest son, got home, and his dad got there and everybody sat with him for, 6-8 hours. They all came to me and they said, it's time. This isn't going to return to, we'll never have Stephen back. And the doctors basically said that if they could ever pull him off the ventilator, he would be on a trach the rest of his life. He would be in a nursing home. He would require 24-hour-a-day care. And that was the best case scenario. And they didn't think that that was even going to happen. And I said, okay, I'm not going to make my son suffer. And we made that decision as a family. His dad was there and said goodbye, but didn't want to be there for the end. I had to respect that. My husband waited for me outside in the waiting area, and Nina and his little brother, myself, and a family friend that grew up with him, Jennifer, was with us. We sat around him as they removed life support and turned all the machines off so we didn't have to hear him pass through the sound of a machine. And we held his hand. And, we were told this could take a long time or it can go very, very quickly. And you'll know pretty quickly if it's going to take a little while. If it takes a little while, it lingers. And they assured us that they would make him medically comfortable. They would come in and administer whatever, drugs to make him where he's not gasping for air. And I made sure that he was comfortable. I had them come in and administer. And we sat there with him, and I walked around the room and I rubbed everybody's backs, and I told them all to get in there and talk to him, tell him what you need to say, leave nothing left. Make sure everything that needs to be said is said. I draped myself over my younger son and told him there had been a rift between them. They didn't get it cleared. And I assured him that Stephen would never hold a grudge, that you can't sit here and be upset. You have to be here and honor him. So tell him, get in his ear and whisper it. If you need to have a moment by yourself, I'll make the room clear. You tell me what you need. And we all had our chance. Nina at one point climbed up and laid on him and had some pretty intense emotions. Then she got up and let all of us have a little more time with him. And then at some point, my youngest son grabs me and he says, Mom, you've made sure everybody else has said what you need to say. You have to get in there. You have to tell him it's okay to go. He won't go until he hears from you. And so I stood beside him and I held his hand. I wrapped his fingers around my fingers and I held his hand. And I leaned into him and got very close to him so he could hear me. And I told him, like always, all is forgiven, Stephen. I have forgiven you and you have forgiven me time and time again. This is no different. That it's okay to go. That Grandma is waiting for you. That your friend Chris is there waiting on you. And you will no longer have a wheelchair and you will no longer be suffering from addiction. You are okay. It is going to be a glorious place where you're going. And I told him, I said, I'm going to walk you to the gates. And I get you there. You got to go. And I'll come see you soon. It was probably less than a minute later and he passed. It was the most peaceful passing. And it wasn't until several minutes passed that he had stopped breathing. And I hadn't let go of his hand. And Nina stepped away and Logan stepped away. And there was just this moment of me holding his hand with nobody else around him that he hit me. And it's just most horrendous guttural scream and cry came out of me. The realization that all of these years of chasing him through addiction, that I was actually letting him go for the first time. And I didn't know how I was supposed to live. That how was I supposed to let him go? I chased him to his grave. And I'd do it again.
I am so sorry for your loss.
He has been quite a loss.
I want to say I have so much respect for you coming on here and sharing your story. And you said to your son when he had his first accident, you said to him, you're going to come out of here and you're going to share your story so that you can help other people. And you are on here sharing your story for the parents who are listening, who are where you were, let's say 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So I commend you and the bravery, the selflessness. It's.
I have definitely taken my pain and I'm turning it into purpose. No question. I was embarrassed and ashamed. I lived a very double life during those years of Stephen's active addiction. I worked in an industry where I couldn't explain to people what was going on in my personal life. I wouldn't have gained any of their respect in my professional life if they knew what I was dealing with. I worked as a safety professional, and we're supposed to be moral compass straight as an arrow and be the guiding light through safety for a company. And then here I am at home, can't control the chaos of my home. So when Stephen passed, there was a freedom that came from that with, I no longer was going to live in the shadows of shame and embarrassment and isolation of what active addiction did to me. I was going to scream from the rooftops. I've been there. And I'm going to tell you what we went through because I was too embarrassed and ashamed to say it at the time. And I don't want anybody else to live like that. I don't want mothers and fathers to live like that. They shouldn't be ashamed and embarrassed of it. Their children need our help. There's so many different avenues for recovery and so many different theories, whether it's tough love, meet them where they're at, harm reduction, wherever it's at. There's a place for all of it. There is no one way. It should all be allowed, whatever works for the individual and the family. But nobody is out there saying, at least when I was dealing with Stephen in active addiction, nobody was saying to me what I'm now out there saying. I needed me back then. I needed that leader for me, and it wasn't out there. So, yes, I share my stories. I talk about the chaos and the drama, and we refer to it in my home as the drug drama. I share that because I'm not trying to glorify that by any means. But when you hear another mother talking about it and you go, yes, that's exactly what I'm going through. That is a connection to somebody else that's going through it that you don't get with other friends in your family or family members that don't understand. Most people don't understand that level of crazy that you normalize in your family or in your household. And to have somebody else that understands it without judgment, man, that's a gift. And that's what I'm trying to create, is a place to let people know we survived it, and I won't judge you for what you're doing right now, what you're dealing with. We survived it, and you will too.
When we go through traumatic events and traumatic changes, when you can relate to someone else's feelings. So like you, for example, sharing your story, another mother out there who's in the thick of it, hears the feelings that you share, and you're a complete stranger to them, but can identify to those feelings, they're no longer alone.
Yeah. And I get that quite often. I knew this was going to be my grief journey. I don't know how I knew it. I just knew it. And I knew that I needed to get out and find the support system that I needed. And for me, it was social media. I'd never been on TikTok. I joined TikTok just as a way to make a diary of what I was going through. Some of my very first videos were me just crying and saying, I lost my son 9 days ago, or whatever the day was. And quickly gathered a community that was supporting me, but was also asking questions. And I still, to this day, 6 months later, I have probably, on an average, 4 or 5 people a day reach out to me privately. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for talking about that. Thank you for making a video about the 5 things you never thought you'd ever say to your son in active addiction. You know, the stories that I've shared. They're like, yes, we had the same scenario. I've made friends all over this country that are mothers that are in the trenches or mothers who have had children pass. And those are very close friendships because we share that same tragedy. And I'm very grateful for that community and that village that surrounds me with their support, but as well as the women and some men that reach out and say, I'm living that right now. And the first thing I say to them is, what are you doing for yourself? You cannot give it all to them. Hold your boundaries. And sometimes you got to love them from a distance. And it's okay. You're still loving them. And don't beat yourself up if you have to check out today. Go back and check tomorrow.
What's your TikTok so people can find you?
Miss Sassy. It's MISS .sassy. And Sassy is SASSE.
MISS.SASSE.
Yes.
Is where people can find you on TikTok. Are there any other channels you want to?
I am on YouTube. I've just started a podcast called Beyond the Storm with Selena.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry. What was the name of it?
Beyond the Storm with Selena.
Okay.
Is the name of my podcast.
And Selena is spelled SALENA.
Yes.
Yep.
That's on YouTube, Spotify, all the major ones, but YouTube is, you can go catch it there. I also have a not-for-profit called the Phoenix Network, and that's thephoenixnetwork.com. And I am very proud of the work we're doing there. And first weekend of June, downtown Kansas, or not downtown, we're going to be in Northeast Kansas City. We're doing an event called Rock the Socks. We're collecting sock donations right now. And then we will hand out Narcan and socks in that community that needs those individual gifts. We're also going to be painting rocks down there in honor of somebody who's passed, if you have a loved one that's passed. Stephen was an artist, so we didn't want to do a balloon release. We wanted to do something that honored the art that he enjoyed doing. So we're going to paint rocks and set rocks in that park that's Northeast Kansas City. So we have a lot of projects that we're working on. I've hosted a fentanyl forum in my small community last month, where I had a recovery judge in our county came and spoke. I had our Missouri representative showed up, as well as our task force and our local PD, and advocates in the area of recovery came. So there's a lot of things that I'm doing grassroots in my small community, but also nationally as well. And I never dreamed that I would be in this position, but I hold it with great honor. And it is a tough story to tell, but it is my story. And I want to share it with anybody who will listen, because I know it helps others.
Selena, I want to thank you for coming from Missouri to come on the show, and your bravery.
Thank you.
Sharing your story just to help another person. I mean, this was just 6 months ago. It's not that long ago. And you are already out here just exactly what you said. You're not shutting up about it. You're creating that awareness.
Yeah.
And I commend you on your bravery. And you are going to help so many people with your story. So thank you again for coming on.
I appreciate the time that you gave me today. I was really looking forward to meeting you. I've enjoyed watching your podcast.
Oh,
and I
thank you.
knew this was a great avenue to come sit down and speak with you.
Thank you so much.